Hello, everybody, and welcome to our latest PACE webinar. This is going to be the last webinar before we take a break for the summer, but we'll be back in September with more great webinars on profitability analytics and related areas. It's my pleasure today to welcome Christine Berry, founder and principal consultant with the Diversity Inclusion Alliance. We'll be talking about unleashing potentials, navigating differences in leaders and teams. And we all know that the hard skills, technical skills are important, but that's the soft skills are equally important for us to succeed in our roles within our organizations. But before we get started, I did want to talk about a couple exciting things that we're doing at PACE. One of which is our PACE Masterclass on Profitability Analytics. We've teamed up with Cost Perform, which is hosting 8 learning modules that will comprehensively cover the profitability analytics concepts. You can go to academy.costperform.com and check out this masterclass. Again, there are 8 modules. Total cost is $99, but you can take the first module for free. So if you're interested in profitability analytics, check out this first module because it's a great overview of our topic. And additionally, within the month, PACE will be publishing a book, Unleashing the Power of Profitability Analytics. It's something that we're very excited about. Again, it's, I think, a unique book covering the topic of profitability analytics in a way that has never been done before, and I encourage you to check that out as well. But without further ado, again, it's my pleasure to welcome Christine Berry, and I look forward to your presentation.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to share my slides. Fantastic. Slide check so everyone can see my slides. Just
Looks good.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you. And we do have a Q&A box, so if anyone wants to ask questions during this webinar, and of course this webinar is recorded and my contact information is available throughout at the beginning and at the end. So if you're watching this on the recording and you have some follow-up questions, you can certainly reach out to me at any time as well. So today, more than ever, organizations are investing in efforts to foster a sense of inclusion and belonging in their workplaces. There's no shortage of studies to support that intentional efforts around inclusion can yield employee engagement, create a culture of innovation, and ultimately impact the organization's bottom line. So there's a few of us here. So when you take a look at this picture, if you wouldn't mind putting in either the chat or the Q&A box, what emotions or feelings do you get by looking at this group of people sharing a meal? Joy. Fun and happiness, happy, absolutely. So you looking at this picture and put yourself in there, right? The last time that you had or shared a meal, breakfast, lunch, dinner, or snack with people that you know, motivation. Yes, absolutely. It's smiles, you feel comfortable, you can be who you are, you're sharing. And ultimately using that metaphor or that thought moving into the workplace. That's what we want to be able to have that comfort level, not only for ourselves, but when we are in leadership positions, to provide that comfort level for the people that we work with, whether it's the immediate people that we deal with every single day, whether it's our vendor partners, whether it's people that we just may see once a quarter at various meetings, right? So we want to be able to create that sense that everyone feels belong. Everyone feels a sense of belonging. Now, what happens, right? So it's not all kumbaya, and there's a double-edged sword to all of this. So cultural differences are often misunderstood or they're ignored, and they can be inadequately managed. And when that happens, and you can probably all, raise your hand or remember a situation in your personal as well as professional lives when people from different cultures or people who are just different, it may not have worked out that greatly, right? So miscommunication may have happened, or you were targeting a goal and you kind of missed it a little bit, right? So there can be a lot of frustrations. And then we're talking about the work environment, there's missed opportunities, right? There can be profitability and loss issues that are going on. So that's why I'm sure a lot of you are here, or perhaps that title of the program caught your eye, saying, how can I integrate this a little bit more, because I have been uncomfortable. I have been in situations that have been a little bit more uncomfortable, and I want to change that. So when we're looking at cultural competence, dealing with differences, it refers to our ability to recognize, engage, and adapt across differences. It refers to our ability to not only understand and bridge the differences, but also understand our own culture, our own identity, our own worldview, those values and influence that shape who we are and what we believe. So once you start this, and this is a journey, this is a developmental journey that we begin early on in our careers, early on in our life, some social scientists as soon as we're born, right? So this is a journey that we have been on our entire existence. And we can apply these concepts again to a society and to workplaces so we can build a little bit more equitable places that we hang out with. I'm throwing in the words mindset. Some of you may be more or less familiar with that. I do have some definitions coming up, but it's also your worldview is your mindset, from a growth mindset to a limiting mindset. And there's there's new skills that go along as soon as your mindset increases and broadens. So for those of you who just want the bottom line, right? And I know the keys to intercultural or keys to navigating differences, there's certain personalities that say, this is great, Christine, but just give me the facts, right? Or just give me what I need to do and so I can move on with my life. This is it, right? So this particular slide are the key intercultural leadership and team competencies that we all can adapt if we choose to and learn from. And so what are they? So it's the I'm okay, you're okay perspective, which basically deals with that we are even, that we are equal, that I'm not any better than you, you are not any better than me, right? So we are on the equitable and equal mindset. Cultivating openness and humility, curiosity, eager to learn, the growth mindset, which I mentioned before, appreciation for ambiguity, ambiguity. I'm going to have a tough one with that word today, and paradoxes, right? So it's not good or bad, right or wrong. It's not a spectrum. It is an and, right? So it's the next one. It's being comfortable with the and or. Thinking about it's not an end game, not only one person wins. You have to be able to flex your flexibility. Your agility is also a word that's used. And if you want to choose between being nice and being kind, I'm going to recommend that you move toward being kind. And then which you also have to have your self-awareness. So easy list just to read off, lifetime to perfect. And so for those who want to go dive in a little bit deeper about how to, we'll go ahead and do that. So these are the things that we're going to be talking about today. Expand your cultural perspective, improving your leadership skills across differences, and then question your assumptions about culture. So there is a common saying that, seeing is believing. But if you put it another way, we believe what we see a lot of the time. So that is, we're making sense of our world, our interactions, and other people through our own lens, right? Our culture and our identity shape our lens. Our ability to understand perspectives of others and effectively bridge across differences is influenced by our level of cultural competence. So whether you recognize it or not, we all have a worldview, right? And our worldview is our lens, and we bring that to work. We bring that to every engagement that we have. So culture, identity, and how we feel about difference is always there. And it's always, whether it's conscious or unconscious, but it's going to be there with us. It's kind of, it's a kind of like our shadow, if you will. And so in the United States, and this is a United States driven topic base. So if you're from outside the United States, feel free to put in the chat if what other polarizing topics that your country may be dealing with right now. But when we're dealing with these polarizing topics within the United States, what we need to realize that we are going to stand on either one side or the other of these topics, or we're going to be neutral to these topics. And these are the polarizing topics that can pull us apart when we're in the workplace. And I know there's a generational aspect of it that we shouldn't be talking about this at work, right? We don't want to talk about anything like that in the work environment. We should just focus on the organizational goals and profitability. And that may have been the rule of thumb or the cultural expectation even earlier in my career, and some of you others who are listening to this. But with the various generations and the mixture of generations, and with social media being so prevalent in our lives, and that's accessible at work, it's not really realistic to think that there's not going to be conversations that are going to be polarizing in our work environments, whether you have a hybrid environment, a remote environment, or you're completely all back together again, depending on what your culture is in your organization. So a quick little fact or fiction. And polarization impedes inclusion and cultural competence. Just put it in the chat. Do you think it's fact or fiction? So I'm hoping I led the witness a little bit. Yes, it's fact. It's absolutely. And that's my point, right? So it does impede and it does polarize. So what we do need to, and again, this is a mindset shift that some people still do have when I'm working with leaders and organizations, that we have to remember that organizations do not operate in a bubble. What happens outside the direct world affects your employees, affects how they show up, affects what happens to them and how they can concentrate during the day. So we need to be aware of that, and we need to be able to acknowledge that. Ignoring certain events that are happening in various communities is not necessarily what a leader would want to do in order to create that sense of belonging for their team members or for fellow leaders, put it that way. So again, a kind of little fact or fiction. A survey of global leaders, and this was from McKinsey Quarterly, cited this is a particular study that only 7%, though we all think globally that this is an important skill set to have, but realistically, or the reality that only about 7% of leaders feel that they have the skill set to deal across cultures, to deal with differences. And then again, of course, this is an easy one. That this is a fact. That in the McKinsey Quarterly, 76% of senior executives said that they believe that their organizations and themselves are not developed yet for global leadership capacities. That cultural confidence is critical to ensuring the growth of their companies, but they don't have the training yet. And so when you reflect on that and you reflect on your team, where are you at with some cultural competencies? Where have you been in development as far as continuing learning? And again, I want to appreciate you and acknowledge that you're being here as well, because the facts of moving forward is everyone says, well, what's the business case, right? Where can I tie my numbers into this? This is wonderful conversation. But over the past 20 and 30 years, the business case is pretty simple. And there's plenty of studies to support it, that in order to attract and retain and increase diverse workforce and engage your workforce, right? Retention, we want our team members to stay with us. And we also want our consumers, right? We want to be able to broaden our marketplace. We must be able to recognize, understand, adapt, and leverage across cultures. So yes, absolutely, this is a fact. So let's just go through some quick, I'm going to call it set the table. Everyone comes from different perspective. Everyone comes from different thought processes. So for the next, 40 minutes as we're hanging out together, I want to be able to set the table for as far as some terms that we will be using moving forward. And one of them is cultural competence, right? So I've used that term a few times. So cultural competence is very complex, but it encompasses a lot of different terms that we're going to peel back a little bit. In its simplest definition, it's the ability to recognize, engage, and adapt, right? So takeaway, recognize, engage, and adapt. And I use this picture of the little boy in an aquarium because he is looking at the fish through glass, right? So he has the awareness that the fish are out there, but yet the fish in the aquarium, they're swimming in water. They're not sure what that water is, right? That water could be, they don't have the understanding of where they are around them versus a fish who's swimming in water, say in an ocean, or maybe in a lake that doesn't have salt in it, right? So it really comes down to the cultures that you're brought up in and the ability to pause and recognize and say, wait a minute, other people may not be living the existence that I'm living. So diversity, we've heard a lot about that, but it basically just comes down to how we are unique individuals. Those of you who have siblings, right? You may have a brothers, you may have sisters, maybe have all been raised in the same household, but you're not all alike, right? You may not all look like them. You don't have the same thought process. You don't have the same likes and dislikes, right? You don't have the same personalities. So though you have shared similar DNA, there's differences among that. If you're at a desk right now, right, you can look around your desk and how many different writing utensils do you have? Or how many pictures that are different on the wall, right? That is all basically the diversity and diversity dimensions that we all want to bring together. And some of the differences don't matter very much, but there are differences where people have been treated differently. There are differences that have caused some inequitable behavior because of their race, because of their gender identity, because of their sexual orientation, because of their social economic status, because of their abilities or non-abilities, or because of their religion and more. So if your organization relies on people, which it probably does, that is imperative that we create an environment that everyone can thrive in that environment. So exclusion, another word for exclusion is othering that you may have seen. And this is knowing that what makes you different is not respected and it's not valued, right? So exclusion, think about even when you were in high school or middle school and you couldn't get into that group of friends that you wanted to get into, or perhaps you couldn't get into a certain restaurant because the reservations are, they have reservations until 2016. So exclusion can happen when there is a low level of belongingness in an environment and a low value on someone's uniqueness. So, and that individual is not treated as an organizational insider, and their differences are not acknowledged, and it's not valued within an organization or group. A simulation is it can happen when they say their value is high belongingness and we want to include everyone, but it's really a low value on uniqueness, and that you won't be treated as the corporate insider or on the fast track to leadership and growth, or get those best assignments until you assimilate and become part of the culture. You need to become part of us. And that's when you minimize what's different about you to conform to the norms of that particular culture that you're working in. And this has been studied for decades as well. And not a lot has changed. And what I do want to bring, so this was a study from Deloitte, and they did a study about diversity, equity, inclusion in partnership with New York University School of Law in New York City, United States. And they collaborated on this study. And they surveyed about 1,300 employees across the United States. So it's a United States more basic study around covering or hiding who you are when you come into the office, or hiding who you are when you jump on a virtual meeting, or downplaying, right? And what they found that is, for me, it's a little disheartening still. When the study was first conducted 2014, 10 years ago, about 60% of this 1,300 said they did some type of covering at work. And today, the respondents, when they repeated it, was about 60%. So I actually have that reverse. So in 2014, it was 61. In 2024, it was 60. So what is this? So this is a concept that you may or may not be familiar with, but this is a concept that has to deal with, in general, 4 levels of covering. So what do you mean, right? So when you go into the workplace, appearance. So you may cover your self-expression. You may cover a tattoo, for example, such as grooming or your attire or certain mannerisms, certain way people speak, right? There has been a lot about what is professionalism in majority white culture in the United States, and that the certain type of verbiage, and that's what we consider professional languaging. So if that's not familiar to you, you have to cover and you have to blend into that mainstream, right? So a worker who uses, and it could also actually be, and we've had some presidential candidates way back early on in our history, is that someone who may use a cane may not want to bring their cane to work because they don't want to think that they're not able to do the work and they don't want to draw attention to them. The second group, general group around covering, could be advocacy, right? Based covering, which is not defending or promoting your interest that you really believe in, such as when someone says something biased, blatantly biased or rude, or a stereotypical comment. You know it is, but you may be fearful to say anything or call attention to it, right? So that is you want to keep harmony, so you're keeping that to yourself. Another aspect of covering is affiliation. You minimize the behaviors of your identity so you can navigate the common stereotypes. So, for example, earlier in my career, sometimes in certain situations, when I was a mom, I avoided talking about children at work because I didn't want others to think that I wasn't committed to the work environment, right? Or there had been a situation where I had been told, or maybe you don't want to wear your engagement ring to this was many years ago, but from a generational standpoint, you may not want to wear your engagement ring to job interviews because the hiring manager may think you're only going to be there for 3 to 5 years and then have a baby, right? So those type of covering aspects of it, and we all do it, right? Dominant groups, marginalized groups, we all have this level of covering. And then association is the third. So we cover for appearance, advocacy, affiliation, and then association. So you may cover, for example, someone who you're in love with, right? What your family looks like, right? If you walk into an environment and you don't think that's going to be accepted, you may not share that. You may not put your family picture up at work. So that's what covering has to do with, and exclusion. And then we move into differentiation and tokenism. And that can happen when they say, because sometimes our espoused beliefs and values is not the actual what is played out in our corporations, is that they have a high value on uniqueness, right? And they may even want to hire for uniqueness, but they keep them again separate. They're not going to be part of the insiders again because of their difference. And so they're part of the larger culture, so they may be able to check off a diversity goal box, but they're really not involved in the decision making or high level decision making, and or again, I keep on using crawling, climbing that corporate ladder. So that brings us to the term inclusion, which is what we all want to be able to strive for. And that's a high sense of belonging and a feeling of being an organizational insider. So I know a lot of us have heard authenticity, bringing your whole self to work. Yes, as a platitude, but that really goes a lot deeper as being able to feeling respected and valued in meetings. So I do have a self-efficacy and self-confidence to speak up, for example, that I won't be othered if I bring my opinion that may be different than someone else's. And so that brings you more into just a couple of more terms that deal with cultural flexibility, right? Being able to, or the willingness to change and adapt, right? And so not being so focused on this is how we've always been doing it. That comes up a lot. We've always done it this way. Yes. And perhaps we need to be a little bit more flexible and adapting and looking at a different perspective that was brought up. So that's the cultural flexibility. Then the cultural agility as well. So we want to look at that being that we want to be able to build and these aren't something that necessarily everyone has from a strength standpoint. So again, remember, these are all developmental competencies. They're all team competencies as well as leadership and individual competencies. But the ability to think and understand quickly and discern certain cultural patterns, which we're going into from an organizational standpoint, so that you can start to look for in your work environment. So you can discern certain type of patterns, even versus what's a pattern versus a stereotype. So what I'd like to take a pause and think to yourself, when you look at this picture, what do you see? Do you see a, you know, booming economy? Do you see confusion? And there's no right or wrong answer. And feel free to put it in the chat if you want to, but just take a pause if you had not if you had been um, I was going to say if you had lost or you would multitask, the word I was looking for, if you had been multitasking. So I appreciate you coming back and just kind of taking a look at this for a second and kind of feeling what that would be. A lot of us, and again, in the US world, we have been familiar with VOCA, right? So who can raise a hand or type in what that means, right? From a vulnerability standpoint, um, so uncertainty, complexity, ambiguous, right? So those are the type of conversations that a lot of us have been having over the past 10 years in, yes, an economy. Thank you. And this is something that we want to take a look at, because when we're dealing with different cultures, and this was brought to my attention just a few weeks ago when I was participating in a webinar, and this is in Africa. This is a picture from there. And what the consultant was sharing with us was that this VOCA atmosphere, or when you're looking or you're dealing with people and partnerships and team members from developing countries, this is their breakfast sometimes, right? The complexity and their environments are going to be different. Even just what they need to do to get to work in the morning is going to be completely different lived experiences than, say, perhaps their counterparts in the United States. So something as simple as that needs to have a pause and have an awareness that you may wake up in the morning, again, from the United States, wake up, come downstairs, have a cappuccino, cup of tea. You may go for a walk, work out, go out into your garage, drive your car if you need to still go into your office, or go into your office and just pop on your computer. That, 3 or 4 hours before you even start your day is going to look completely different with your colleagues across the country and across the world. It's going to look completely different depending on what level they are at within the organization as well. For example, some people may not have 2 cars to be able to utilize that. And we found that out a lot in the United States with COVID and hybrid environments and with academics and children's learning. They didn't have the environment to have a safe environment or even internet, right, to access that. So just pausing and thinking about that, how people start their day, can have a little bit more empathy, or looking at people's world experiences and lived experiences before they even get their workday started. And then it brings back to having that type of an awareness, looks at cultural humility. And that is being emphasizing, because competence is a strong word. That means more of an expert. So leaning into that genre, that area of that just being humility, that it's a lifelong learning, right? I'm never going to know everything about every single culture, but I can pause and listen and be curious and center others versus centering myself. And this is a story that is that I put in here just to remind me that we may all have the same values, right? So this particular value is we wanted to win, right? We wanted to make sure that there are 2 runners, and there was a Kenyan runner who was a few meters away from the finish line and got disoriented because the finish line, the signage was in Spanish, and he did not understand where the finish line exactly was. So the runner behind him, who could read the signs and knew it was right there and it was his, he deserved it, kind of pushed him along. to the finish line because they had a language barrier. So they, the value of being honoring, the value of, letting the person take credit for the hard work that they deserve, and someone else not stepping over them and saying, I'm a champion. And that happens, and that can be related so easily to even our work environments and to our meeting setting, right? Who do you listen to in your meetings? Do you attribute someone else's idea to the originator, or does it popcorn around the office or popcorn around the meeting, and then someone picks it up and say, oh my gosh, that was a great idea, when it was actually brought up 20 minutes prior, right? So having that humility just to stop and pause and to listen and to help someone else along is something that we can also learn and understand. So a lot of different languaging, a lot of different verbiage, and some you may be more familiar with and some may not. So this is a great slide, and I can certainly send some out to you if anyone is interested in as well, that you take, just taking a pause at what terms are you familiar with, that you're familiar with, what terms that you're not familiar with, what ones pique your curiosity, what ones made you a little bit angry, right? What made you a little bit uncomfortable? Because every emotion that we're feeling when we talk about differences, that's a signal for growth. That's your growth edge, that you can peel back and say, you know what Christine just said, or what that person just said kind of really triggered something inside me. So let me go, put that aside and let me try to investigate that a little bit more. There's also if you want to take a screenshot of this, there's also a great resource of additional terms if you want to dig into this a little bit more, and that's on the bottom as well. So difference. It's not our differences that necessarily divide us, but it's our inability to recognize them. So what I like to work with, working with clients individually and or teams, is frameworks, structures, evidence-based information. And so the two frameworks, leadership frameworks that I'm going to be sharing with you for the remaining of the time is going to be, the first one is the intercultural development continuum. And this is a measure of self-understanding as well as team understanding and the broad spectrum culture, organizational understanding. So as we walk through the next couple of slides, again, I encourage you to picture yourself. And one of the best ways to do this, to really make, because we're all adult learners, and until we engage in the content, there's not going to be a lot of growth or learning, right? So it's not necessarily, this material isn't something that you can just read and all of a sudden you're going to be able to put into practice. It takes a lot of self-reflection. So I encourage, as I go through the next few slides, to think about a situation at work or personally, and that has been challenging. Maybe it's a repeated situation. Maybe it's something that comes up all the time, right? And what you can look for is just as I go through the different stages, what's different about this particular situation of who you're dealing with, the stakeholders. Is it a different leadership philosophy? Is it different company cultures? Is it different genders? Is it different ages? Is it different ethnicities, right? So what is the differences, and point them right out and just jot down if you have a piece of paper of what kind of give you some clues. And then if it is a repeat or not, what emotion? Are you frustrated? Are you mad? Are you angry? Are you just like fed up, right? So try to identify the emotion, because like I mentioned before, the emotions are our messengers for continual personal growth. And then you can look on how you think right now, how did I handle this situation? Or where is that situation at right now, right? So those three aspects of it. What makes it different from you or with the stakeholders that are involved? Identify your emotion that you're feeling around that, and reflect on how you believe that you did. And then we'll look at, overlay that to some of these stages that we're going to be going through, and then you can kind of come back together and do a little bit of a self-reflection after. So this model is, because we need to remind ourselves that this is a developmental journey. And if I say that once, I'll probably say that a few times. And you're going to see people who are just coming into awareness about their differences. And this is not a judgment conversation. This is not a good, bad conversation. This is an and conversation, right? So we do not have to correct everyone. We don't have to correct everything. What we have to do is continue to encourage curiosity. So you can encourage curiosity in your work environments, in your home life. You can encourage curiosity with yourself and have meaningful conversations so that people can continue to progress along that journey of leveraging and managing difference and inclusive leadership. So that's combining how to be inclusive and then the leadership capacity. So as I walk you through this, it's a theoretical model, and there's various stages that we can that they have. So it's a continuum, and you can be in one stage in one aspect of a scenario, and then you can slide to another stage, but then you may be popping back. Right. So again, this is not a judgment. So the continuum has 5 stages. It has denial, polarization, minimalization, acceptance, and adaptation. And these 5 these 5 groupings are, again, I'm going to throw in, they're around your various mindsets and they're around your worldview. So high level denial and polarization happens when you have more of a monocultural mindset, meaning that you only see the world through your lens. Acceptance and adaptation are what we call more intercultural worldviews, where you can begin to see from an other's lens, or the walking in someone else's shoes from an empathy standpoint. And then the last would be the minimization is more the it's the transitional stage that we can come and go back to. But we're gonna dig into this a little bit more. So the denial and polarization stage, which would be the first stage. These stages are where we view difference in the terms of big, broad categories, us versus them, right? In very simplistic terms, people in the denial or the polarization stages, generally, they haven't had a lot of exposure to difference, right? So if we're thinking about this as a journey from our beginning, perhaps they lived in more of a secluded area, or their lived experiences has only been in their own neighborhood, so to speak, whatever that definition of neighborhood, their own workplaces, and where they have restaurants and meals, or their families, right? So maybe they did not grow up in communities that, or maybe they did grow up in communities that people were just like them. And again, nothing's wrong with that. So they weren't able to develop different complexities and understanding differences. They perhaps were a little bit more isolated, didn't do a lot of traveling. And so that's when people are more in the us versus them thought process. So then as we continue on the intercultural development continuum, right, and it helps understand various diversity experiences that people have. The third stage that we look at is the minimalization stage. And this is where most people fall on the continuum, is that the more we can continue to work with people who are different from us, the more we realize that we're all human, that we all have similar values, right? We all love our families. We all want to be respected. However, at this stage, we may overemphasize what's common, the commonalities, to the point where we miss the differences that make people different. It's not that we don't see difference, because we can see difference. We just think we were told by someone that it's not important and we shouldn't bring it up, right? That the expression that I always heard when growing up is that I don't see color, right? And now, as my developmental journey, well, of course I see color. I can see blue, I can see green, I can see, brown of my shelves, I can see blue on my coffee cup. So I'm going to see color of another person. And that's more or less, I need to acknowledge that. Yes, I do see differences, right? So, and so we have to realize that, yes, we have a lot of things in common, but there are certain things we don't want to minimize because it's important to that other person. So a lot of this comes in when we're talking about the golden rule, right? Treat others as you would want to be treated. And I'm going to challenge that one a little bit, but let's just stay with that for a minute. Because what you thinking about other things of color blindness or age blindness or gender blindness, right? So at this stage, we want to be proponents of diversity and inclusion. Yeah, we want fairness, we want equity, and we think the best way to achieve that is to just to treat everyone the same. And that worldview is not, could be conscious, could be unconscious, but what we want to be careful of, especially in the work environment, actually, or even personally, I guess, in our lives, is that we assume that our cultural norms and what we believe, that everyone should believe that. And that we begin to judge people like potential candidates, potential partners, vendors, the same way, because if their values or if their norms and the way they behave is different than ours, then we may think less of them. And then we start moving away from the I'm okay, you're okay. And then we kind of start leveling it up and say, wait a minute, my way of doing things are better, versus stepping into that respect. So if you need to really understand context at this time. You need to understand making sure your languaging, like I mentioned, that the task of and the function of leveling or setting the table from a languaging and definition standpoint, that is so key in inclusive languaging and having conversations across differences to make sure that what I believe or what I'm thinking about a definition of a word, that it's translating and they're understanding that exact same thing. So the minimalization aspect of it is really more about, we have to get some clarity around that. And so when I mentioned I'm going to play around with and kind of challenge you with the golden rule, which, treat everyone the way I would want to be treated, which is great. And think about the platinum rule, right? So the platinum rule is treat everyone the way they want to be treated, treat people as an individual. And that takes a little bit more time. That takes slowing down a little bit more. That takes that curiosity, and that takes that self-confidence to be uncomfortable, because you may not know, and to ask those questions. So we want to make sure that this, as it translate, and it may seem to be a very light topic, but what happens if we are minimizing differences in the workplace and we want to treat everyone the same and not notice differences, it can actually lead to policies and practices that are not inclusive, that where everyone is not able to do their best work, where you do have candidates fall out of your candidate pool in your interview process because they are going through certain aspects of it. They're like, well, what they're saying that they're inclusive, but as I'm going through this process, it really isn't. Or once they join your organization, they don't stay, they don't last long. And that's where a lot of the data and the analytics can come into to find out where you may be losing some of your candidates. So to achieve inclusion, we have to move beyond minimalization and recognize the differences that matter. And that comes to acceptance and adaptation, right? So on the IDC continuum, the acceptance and adaptation are considered the intercultural stages, right? Where we must be more complex in our understanding. And you're curious about your difference. Isn't that interesting? Tell me more. How could I consider that viewpoint in the decision-making process? How can I think of that viewpoint in as we're developing a new product launch, right? So those type of aspects of it, and we've all seen that in conferences, or when somehow they've been a misstep when they brought a product to launch, and you're thinking, why didn't they ask, or didn't they see that, right? So those are the conversations that we want to have more behind closed doors to get those diverse perspectives, so we're able to foster more understanding and inclusion into the areas of difference that are important to our colleagues, not what we think are important, what they want us to think is important. So looking at that is these acceptance and adaptation, where we develop more complex understandings, and that we're flexible, right? So the cultural flexibility, humility, being a little bit more adaptable in our thought processes. And so, caveat here, this does not mean agreement. This does not mean I am completely 100% on board with everything that you say. And obviously, leaders have a decision to make, but this is a way to get more perspective, get more voices heard, so the leader themselves are making a better decision than they were if some of these voices in the room were not listened to, or didn't have the ability to speak truthfully, because they were too busy covering who they were, right, to bring their full self to the workplace. So that's why I just want to make sure it's not always an agreement, but it's just understanding it. And we're going to peel back the acceptance and adaptation as we continue to go out as we continue out and finishing out the program today. So let me go back to this one. So if you participated, you can take a screenshot of this, or I can send this to you. What I'd love you to be able to do, again, from a self-reflection, an adult learning and development standpoint, is to go back. Where were you on the development model? What stage were you at? And again, not good or bad, right or wrong. This is not judgment. We need to allow a lot more grace, a lot more space in our learning and development when we're dealing with differences. And we need to have some more time for reflection. And I know certain cultures, and we need to get it done. We need to get it done yesterday. And some of us, me included, may have 100 things on my to-do list. I'll get done 99, and I still berate myself, and I still up all night because I didn't get that one extra thing done, right? So how am I supposed to have time for self-reflection and learning? Well, I'll challenge you, if you want to be able to bridge differences, navigate differences, it has to start with ourselves. It's not going to start with anyone else. And that's where building that into your daily routine and situational aspects of it, working with a consultant, working with a coach, working with a trusted friend and colleague, can help you develop that and move yourself along. So speaking of moving along, when we start looking at cultures and who we are culturally, is that we want to make sure that my identity to myself is important to me, and that drives my thought process. Your identity, how you identify, drives your thought process. And yes, I purposely used "Who are you?" For those of you who are in my age bracket, who remember the release of this in 1978. But that will give you a insight into kind of where my age is, my cultural. So those are the things that you want to be aware of and start listening for when you're becoming more aware. So what is culture, right? So a culture is refers to the values, beliefs, and traditions of that particular group, right? Culture brings out their unwritten rules sometimes, right? What we have say that we believe in, sometimes on company websites and brands and wonderful mission statements. But when you peel back the layers of actually the organization or the meeting or the association, it's showing up a little bit differently, right? And so I just love to put this, and I'm going to chowders on this slide, and because I'm from the New England area in the United States, and we often refer to it as chowder. And we love our chowder, and there's different aspects of chowder. So there's New England clam chowder, which is the very first one, it's a little bit thicker. Then there's the Manhattan clam chowder from New York in the United States, which has a little bit more of a redder broth. And then there is also a California, or more of a southern chowder, it's a little bit lighter in the broth type of aspect of it. So you have more of a creamy, you have a red sauce, you have a lighter broth. And so the point is not to make everyone hungry, but the point is, when you say the word chowder, it's going to have different connotations. It's going to have different meanings to different people within the United States. And I don't even know, if you're outside of the United States, you may not even associate chowder with a soup or a stew, right? So those questions, so when we're using certain type of expressions, even sports expressions, they may not be translatable. So we have to make sure that we're very precise in our languaging. And so this is just a general picture of all the different cultures that we all belong to. And it's multicultural that we belong to. We have multiple identities. So from your personal, professional, associations, some of them are more formal, some are more informal. So it's just every day as we walk throughout our life, and they all intersect. So we cannot say we're not a monolith, right? I am not just this one person. For example, I've spent a lot of my time in the dental space, and being in the dental space, coaching clinicians and dental leaders who provide care. Now, this message is transcending beyond that because it's crossing over, because leadership and business and profitability and difference has its way. Um, and so I mentioned the dental space because I had to throw in something about oral health just from this graphic. And my graphic designer created this, and I thought this was poignant for this particular time. So when you talk about our identity, there's identities that are visible, right? You can visibly see I'm white. You can visibly see I'm a woman. You can visibly see that I'm blonde, ish, right? So these are visible aspects of it that we cannot hide. And then there are invisible aspects of it that you, kind of circling back to the covering, that you choose what you want to bring to the work environment. You choose what you want to bring to your various relationships. And some of them, I mean, your identity is very private. Your identity is yours alone. And you determine what name you want to be called. Right. You determine if you do get married, whether or not you want to change your last name. Right. So you have your own personal style. And we need to be able to respect that and be able to celebrate that. Right. And so there's different types of lived experiences that you have, that everyone has, that everyone is bringing to the work environment. So when you're looking at your identities or your identifiers, right? So we're going to be a little bit of a clues to be more attentive to the colleagues and the people who are around us. What we may visually see as an identifier, we still must be curious about. We can't make those assumptions that just because they present as a white cisgender able-bodied woman, that's how I'm going to be relate to myself, right? Because that's always going to inform my opinions. That's going to inform how I do my work, right? And so that aspect of it is something that we need to be aware of. But we first need to know who we are. Right? We have to make sure that we have a clear understanding of my identities, of your identities. So a wonderful exercise from a team perspective, a personal perspective, is really think about, who are you? How do you identify? What gives you the gravitas, right? What makes you feel good about yourself? Is it your profession? Is it your identity? Is it your race? Is your parental status? Is it your generation? Is it where you come from in the world or the country? Is it your hobbies? Is it your religion, right? So how would you identify who you are? And this is just a fun little schematic that we, again, from a team perspective, that something can be brought up to introduce these topics to teams and to various leaders too, that it does not always have to be so heavy. We can just kind of have some fun with identities as well. So whatever layer that you want to dive into this with a group, or with a group, that it can still bring amazing insights and adaptation and understanding and learning to the people that you work with. So cultural patterns, and we need to also identify in our companies, in our family lives, there are certain identities, there are certain power, right? Identities and the more of the power identity structures usually are the ones who can make more of the rules, right? And make more of the policies. And again, this is not a and or, we need to be aware of them. We need to understand, especially say in your cultural work environment, what is the dominant group, right? And the dominant group is the group with the systemic power, the group who has the power over you to make those policies, who has those privileges. And in a social status within society, it may not always be the majority, right? The terminology that we're hearing a lot more of is global majority, which is basically stating that white Americans or from European descent are becoming the minority, and will be the minority in a few years. And that's why the languaging around global majority is coming into play. So ethnocentrism is the belief that, again, it's going back to that continuum. So we're talking about mindsets. If you're not a mindset type of person, then this is another terminology from social scientists and anthropology, that this is a belief that your values are right or better. Okay. And then that sometimes can show up in the dominant group because that's been the water that you've been swimming in, right? That's where you were brought up with the belief that you are and your ways of life are better than someone else's. Okay. And so you just need to be able to have that type of awareness as we're going through the stages of the IDC. Now, this could be a whole other webinar on the isms, but just basically when we're dealing with isms, it has to do with a dominant group over a marginalized group, no matter what type of ism that you may be faced with or looking at. So whenever you hear racism or classism or featureism, think, okay, that's a dominant group. That dominant group, we need to kind of peel back and understand that because they're a marginalized groups. And so that's when you move into the intercultural mindset, or another word would be ethno-relatism, right? And that's not judging a culture. That's not judging the standards, right? So that's moving ourselves away from the being center to everything, and my way is normal and everyone else is strange. I've heard that lately. Oh, they're just strange. The way they do that is strange, right? It's different. It's not what something that you're comfortable with. So you want to make sure, again, step into that curiosity standpoint. A couple of the questions I always get is that, well, this is always about, leveraging difference, but why is it always about the marginalized, right? Why are we talking about that, diversity, equity, inclusion work is just for a little bit, and we're not all included? We all are diverse. We all have our own thought process, worldviews, experiences. So this type of work includes all of us, right? It is an inclusive mindset. It's about benefiting all of us together. And that's why that, even though some of the news and the headlines are talking about perhaps more groups of women, more Black or Indigenous or Latina people, right? Or Asian or disabled or LGBTQ plus, they may be hitting the headlines. But this is talking about everyone, and we want to bring all our identities together. And so what we want to make sure that we're looking at is that the persistent inequities of marginalized groups, based on hundreds of studies that have shown that while mistreatment and discrimination can happen to anyone, and it does happen to anyone, they happen to happen more to members of historically marginalized group, right? There can be double standards for everyone. But most of the time, it's those double standards are applied to marginalized groups right now. People can be abusive and have used abusive language directed at anyone, but now it's mostly been directed to members of marginalized groups. Anyone can be targeted for bullying. Anyone can be targeted for harassment. But research is saying that, again, the more of the share has been a marginalized group, right? So that's why you're seeing more of that. But please make sure you see yourself in this conversation. You are part of this conversation, because that's basically with the root challenges that we want to make sure that we're dealing. So we want to make sure that we are dealing, and that we are 1 minute over. So what I want to finish up with 2 slides, if you would allow me, that we want to make sure that we are not misjudging cultural patterns for stereotypes. So cultural competence depends on your ability to recognize specific differences across cultures, but you don't want to stereotype that particular culture or that particular person, because a stereotype is rigid and it's hard to break up. So a stereotype could be all Asians are good at math, right? Or women are the weaker sex, right? Or Germans like to drink beer, right? So those are stereotypes. And you may be saying, but some stereotypes are good. No, because we want to go back to the platinum rule, right? Not the golden rule. And we want to make sure that we are acknowledging everyone for who they are, and that whether you believe that stereotype is positive or not, it's still a stereotype, and we can still challenge it, right? We need to be able to challenge that in the work environment, so we're not falling into those particular stereotypes of a group of people and we're othering them, because it's, thinking that all Black men play basketball, for example, which I have heard is that's completely inaccurate. And what would happen if you're in a work environment and you have to live up to that stereotype, and that's not even who you are, right? So you really want to make sure that we're judging it and we're not using stereotypes specifically for all groups of people. And we're asking a lot of questions, and we want to be um, inclusive of that. So that was a little bit of unpacking our cultural differences. I am going to stop sharing right now, and I want to see if we have any additional questions or thoughts of what I just presented, or what could be continuing to be presented. So,
Well, unfortunately, I don't think we have time for questions,
okay, sorry about
but
that.
but I'm sure we all have an incredible amount of things to think about after that amazing presentation. It's definitely thought stimulating, and I think we can all go back and work better as a team member, and not only at work but in our lives. And it's really a great presentation. I appreciate your presenting today for our PACE webinar.
Thank you.
So we will be the session is being recorded, and we will make the link available to all the attendees today. And Christine, you mentioned that you would send us a handout or two, I believe,
Yes, I
that
will.
we can also send to the attendees today. And I'm sure you'll have your contact information. If they would like more information, they can reach out directly to you.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you again once more for this great, informative, thought-provoking presentation.
Thank you.
Take care.